Hey guys, Brent Hull, Wednesday design video. Got kind of a fun one, tough one, hard to kind of pull together. There's a lot of details from the front porch to the hierarchy to the back to working with designers from many different areas, all trying to pull together this historic house. A really neat property. Let me know what you guys think, whether I fixed it or not. Okay guys, this is an historic house in Brooklyn, New York that I'm working on, and you can see there's a really great porch here. The porch has changed later. They've got the ranch era 1950s, 1960s railing. There's no porch here, and then it wraps around, okay? So that's the front right there that we were just looking at. They have, introduced a new porch here and then all the way down the side and then around the back. Now I love porches, and looking around this neighborhood, there is some precedent for porches, but I think they went a little porch crazy. But there's two areas. I want to talk about the porch that wraps around, and then I want to talk about this back, kind of kitchen living area. Now, what the architect came up with was this interior that looks like this, okay? It's a very modern interior. I mean, look, the roof line even kind of does a little curl like you're in a museum or something. The problem is that I don't even mind the modern cabinets, is that the parts and pieces of this thing don't read true to me. For instance, look at this door, okay? That's probably there are tall ceilings in there, probably an 8 or 9 foot door with a 6-inch bottom rail, 6-inch side rails. That door it's going to be very difficult to have that door perform very well. And what I'm always trying to do when I'm working on interiors is create a unification, okay? So one of the first things that I'm going to do here is take this bar here and try to bring it around the room, right? And see where it lines up. And it lines up with kind of that mutton bar right there. So what I might do is I might take these and just panel these doors here if I was even going to keep them that big. One, I'm trying to unify the space, right? So you're going to use moldings and everything else to bring it together. This kind of window wall, it wouldn't have been built this way. One, there's nothing supporting the ceiling all the way across there. Maybe you have some ports in here. Maybe you can put in a support in the ceiling, but that's precarious just construction wise. But I really have a problem with this size of this door, because if you look at the front of this house, those doors are bigger and taller than the front door. So as far as a hierarchy goes, we've got these massive doors in the back. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to reduce the size of these, okay? Whether I even keep them arched or not, I might just wanted to keep them square with transoms so they can tie together with this. But you'll see that I've reduced the size of it. The other reason I put this pilaster and this beam in here is because if you look at the floor plan, this room now is ginormous, okay? It's probably 30 by 20, okay? And if you look at the other rooms in the house, even, this is an ad later, it's twice as big as the biggest room, right? And so it's maybe, 1.5 times. It's huge. And so one of the problems is you walking through an historic house and you love the charm and the flow and everything else. And then when you go into the big box on the back side of it, it can feel like a disconnect. And so we are going to try to bring this back into scale, and by putting a little pilaster across here with showing kind of this beam that's been supporting this, gives the visual clues that this was added on later, or that this was opened up and that wall was added later. So that's what this beam is doing in here. And then these pilasters in between the thing help visually support it, okay? Now, what I've done here is I've taken out that lower window and I've taken out the upper window, and I've inserted kind of a column, architrave, frieze and cornice arrangement here, because that's the way typically when these walls were opened up, they would have been put together, is that you wouldn't have just had beams, that there would have been an engaged pilaster there, engaged, and then the door was over here. So going back with the transom, I'm giving them transom still. I'm giving them double hungs. These could be casements as well, but the way it turns the corner, the designer doesn't like this window as much, but I'm okay with it. See what I've done? And you can kind of see the line back inside, where I've reduced that from a 6 foot wide. There is no precedent in my mind of a 6 foot wide French door the way we use them today. And so to have those doors, it's a clear disconnect. And so you know, I've got my chair rail across in here. It ties together with these panels and it starts unifying and bringing the room together. The other challenge is the exterior of this building, and you'll see that I've got this red square already drawn in. But basically what I've done is I've taken this box, okay, that separates these columns, and I'm sitting there going, wow, those columns, that separation of those columns is huge. What's going on there? Well, I measured it out, and center to center is like 19 feet. I think this one was 20 feet. And so what happens visually is that if you have the spacing, it's all this thing called intercolumnization. I can't even say it. But it's the spacing and the visual clues that these columns and their spacing give us. And so if you look around at the front of this house, you know, the spacing between these columns is like 12 feet, okay? It may not even be 12 feet. There is a design clue that we've got already here that when this is, you know, spread really wide like it is, it's hard to manage visually, because what's happening is, and I talked about it all the time with windows, but see how these windows, how that individual pane is a rectangle pointed up? This window I know was added later because of those window panels. Same with these, these are original windows, okay? I can tell because the orientation of the rectangle of the individual pane is a rectangle going up. Look what's happened here. My rectangle is laying on its side. And so what really should be happening is that what you want is that the columns spread apart in a way so that this little rectangle creates visual height. And so they just don't have enough columns on here. They've spaced them out too much. The other thing is that the columns should make sense. The columns should help frame, like these two columns frame that opening. These don't frame anything, and so they're kind of haphazard the way they're laid out. Further, I'm not even sure this is going to get by landmarks. If you look at the deal, I would have probably had the front porch end here at this bay, the back porch maybe start here, okay? So you walk up onto it. So this is now going in down to your backyard. But there could have then been a hierarchy that this was the front porch, this is clearly a back porch, the railings step down, and all these other details will step down. So what I've shown is that in that individual square, the height of their railing currently is like 38 inches, okay? So from here to there is 38 inches. You know, if you watch my videos, I hate that. It shouldn't be 36. And the way I would handle that is I'd bring it down to probably 30 and then maybe have an invisible thing that brings you up to code if necessary, because they're showing, it's probably 3 feet right there. Probably a little bit over code, but the historic precedent in the neighborhood is all lower handrails. So I would argue with the Historic Commission, we're going to go back with the historic precedent. So one, it's too tall. The other thing is that, you know, in this opening, when you divide it just in two, I end up looking at this thing. And so I would probably divide it into three so that there is some centering that goes on. And then finally, a lot of stuff going on here. I played around with kind of this arrangement and this opening. And so what happens is that when there's no engaged pilaster here, nothing engaged here and nothing engaged here, it ends up looking very new house-ish, okay? And that's not the way it would have been done historically. So I've gone on the other side of the railing, I'm looking on the other side, and you can see those pilasters are coming through. I've got beadboard back here. This is the back porch. This is an historic house. I'm dressing it down a little bit, creating that hierarchy. I've sized the doors to 2 foot, so it's a 4 foot door with side lights, right? As opposed to a big 6 foot wide door, which again, I don't find a lot of historic precedents for a 6 foot wide French door with 3 foot leaves. It's just too big. So I think this is a real handsome arrangement. I've got a strong full column here, even though these sit on pedestals, because we want strength in the corner. I've got the full entablature going across and then it tying into the porch roof. Now, the one trick I want to show you guys that I did on that interior that I think really makes a big difference is if you're playing around with a full entablature, okay? So if I've got my column capital, right? And then I've got my beam going up, and it's an architrave, and then I've got my frieze, and then I got a bed mold, it goes out Corona, Cymation, right? So if I'm looking at the parts, I've got an architrave, a frieze, and a cornice, okay? Now what you'll see that I did is, here's your bed mold, okay? That's the bed mold, this is the Corona, that's your Cymation. Is that the only thing that's running around this room maybe is the cornice, maybe it's the Cymation and the Corona, probably not the full entablature. But what happens is my column goes up and supports the, you know, architrave, frieze, and cornice. Same thing here in the pilaster is I got a full entablature around here, but because I don't want a heavy molding wrapping around this whole room, I can take just the part of it, just the Cymation, or just those two parts, and all of a sudden my moldings run around the room look like, right, either something like this. Okay, so there's a little step where my Corona is, then I've got my Cymation. This is like an 80-10 crown, and my roof is up here. It can be just this molding that runs around, or if I wanted, I could bring my whole bed mold and bring it around, and it run around the room. If I wanted to, and this is where I play with hierarchy and play around with this thing, but I don't want a lot, because if it's a back porch, I want to convey this little simple detail there. So that's why, you know, I've got just a simple crown, but it ties into this full entablature, ties into this beam, starts bringing everything together. My pedestal height is going to unify the lower panels of the door. It's going to unify this beadboard height, and it's going to kind of bring this room together visually. Now, you don't have to use that. You don't have to have that, but I do think it helps unify the room and bring it together. So a number of concepts there, right? Both interior and exterior, how to make a, you know, historic house more historic, because they're about to go before landmarks, and I fear that taking this design as it's currently laid out is they're going to have a hard time getting into pass, because they've introduced a front porch that runs all the way around the house, and so we'll just have to see. But simplifying the design, giving it more of an historic precedent, I think helps this. Let me know what you think. Okay guys, that was a hard one, because you've got the exterior details that will be criticized by the Landmarks Commission, and then you've got the interior details where usually they don't have much of a say. But what does the story want to tell? What do we want to communicate to people as far as what this house is, what it was, and do you want to walk back into a space like that where you are in a modern loft, not in a 1900s Brooklyn house? So interesting, kind of some philosophical things to think about. You guys let me know what you think.